As part of the Counterfeit Kit design team, the last challenge of every month is to use up our scraps, and I have got a layout using a collage technique and a bonus of some pocket pages featuring 5x7 designs. Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty, where I create with paper and photos in artful ways. So my counterfeit kit this month has focused on travel theme, and I am doing a travel that we took in 2023. So yes, these stories are a little bit old, but that's okay. I'm just going to chug along. I have a list of things that I'm working on. So I pull out this photo next. I'm actually doing 3 albums, if you haven't seen previous videos this month. So there's a lot of repetition going on. I have a lot of scraps happening. And so we're going to pull out a base paper for this layout. Now I could have just used cardstock, but this gives just a little bit of texture to the background. So I wanted to go ahead and start with that. And then it's time to pull out my scraps. I keep all my scraps in a leftover plastic it's the plastic packaging from other products. And so I'm going to create a foundation, a grounding for my photo down at the bottom, and I intended to keep it at about a third of the layout, but I got a little carried away and it ends up being about half. But the process really is simple. It's just a matter of pulling out lots and lots of pieces, and what I'm going to do in particular is use larger blocks of pattern papers and then offset and contrast those with the border strips that I cut off of my pattern papers, so that I have thicker and thinner blocks of paper, strips of paper, and contrasting colors. So with that explanation out of the way, let's actually start building. Okay, I do chop some of my pieces down even smaller so that like I said, I'm trying to get that scale to be about a quarter of the page. But then I saw this little airplane, which reminds me, don't forget to look on both sides of your pattern papers, because we often will see a pattern and forget what's on the back. So that airplane came up as one of the patterns on the back of these scraps, and I am going to tuck embellishments into these layers, so that acts as an embellishment right there. So I wanted to be sure to include that piece, and I am trying to shift everything down to try and keep that foundation a little lower on the page. And again, I'm cutting things apart, layering things up. I'm trying to keep all of my edges uneven. If you have some areas even and some areas uneven, it looks wrong. But if you keep everything uneven and kind of oddly staggered, then it looks purposeful. So here I am adding in some of those strips, just trying to find the best places where they contrast the blocks. And I'm trying to use at least 2 zones of the same pattern in various areas. Now you see I won't have that completely with all the patterns, but I do use a couple of them in that way. And then when I'm adding pieces on, I'm trying to find places where things naturally tuck. So the corner of that teal paper naturally tucks in between the wing and the tail of that plane. So that's creating more of those little angles and uneven edges that you can use to tuck embellishments, other pieces of paper, and it just makes everything a little more dynamic. All right, you see I've moved that star strip across a couple of places. I have that floral border strip across a couple of places, and yes, at this point things will still move around. I'm not showing you the entire process because this takes me quite a while, but it's worth it to use up all the scraps that I have, so that I can get a lot more layouts out of the 1 paper pack that I bought, because I am doing 3 albums on this trip. With all of those things kind of in place, I will grab the first layer with a piece of low-tack tape, and that way I can come in and glue down the bottom layer. Yes, some of it will move and shift, but I will come back and fix things and move things around even more. This is a good place to mention that I'm only putting glue on the bottom of these paper blocks so that I can tuck things on the top. All right, with the base done, I do want to do some trimming. So I use my scissors to trim off the easiest edge, because then it will fit back in my paper trimmer so that I can get nice straight even edges on the more complicated overlapping messy edge. So that way I know that my layout is back down to a nice clean tidy 12 by 12. Okay, despite my trimmer getting all clogged up, I am back and I am ready to put on the next layer here. If you have multiple layers, you can use this tape trick multiple times and just keep them in order. and then reverse the process when you put them all back on and get everything glued down. Like I said, some things did shift, and I will fix that, and I will continue to rearrange because I see better ideas. All right, next up is to sort through my pile of embellishments, and I'm just pulling out anything at this point that I like to go with this layout. Doesn't matter the size, the color, whatever. I'm just pulling it to see if it could work, and that way I have options when I go. And then I also have my sticker book with smaller icons and images that I can use to fill in gaps. This cut file I've been using pieces of throughout the month, and I continue to cut it apart, so it is technically scraps at this point, and I'm using parts of that. I did find pieces that could work for my journaling and my title, and I'm going to use Hello NYC as my title, so I get that going on. And then I've got the bones of my layout done with my space for my title, my journaling, and then my foundation collage. And I'm adding more to this collage with these embellishments. So I find a camera, a ticket. I think I come in with shoes because we just walked around New York City when we were there and just saw what we could in walking distance. And that was kind of our journey in the city. So yeah, I'm just filling in with all these bits and pieces. Don't be afraid to cut apart things if they don't quite fit. And here I'm going to lay them on, and I'm even going to offset them. So the embellishment kind of becomes two separate embellishments, and yet the two pieces will help move across the photo and tie everything together that way. So I'm using it like that. And here I'm just finding extra little pieces to finish up touches to this layout. And then the very final thing, I got my journaling on and I realized I mentioned time. And so I remembered I'd seen a clock in my embellishment. So I pulled out the die cut ephemera clock and the smaller sticker clock, and I add those, and that worked out perfectly because this one block of pattern paper was a little too big and it was taking up too much eye space. So that clock helped out right there. All right, next up, I'm going to move on to a pocket page of extra photos to go along with these layouts. I've been using these Sea Lion brand 5x7 photo pockets. They fit in 8.5x11 binders, but of course you can tuck them in with your 12x12 binders as well. If you want to try adding extra photos without a lot of extra work, these are a great way to do that. They're 5x7, so I can decorate them up and use 4x6 or smaller photos. And how I do that is I take scraps and then I piece together whatever scraps I like. And like I said, look on the back side because I ended up liking the back side of this paper much better. I will piece together those scraps using my grid mat to help me keep everything to the right size and create 5x7 background layers to go with my 4x6 photos, or as you'll see in a minute, smaller. Now I did use tape here. I just did that to temporarily flip it over so that I could make sure everything was aligned straight and then add some glue. I did forget to remove the tape, but like you'll see later, I'm also going to use the backside of these scraps. And if you're going to ever write on that, you need to make sure you remove that tape because it doesn't handle most inks. All right, I'm just going to kind of step through this process. So here you see me creating the second background for the second pocket, and I try to use at least one patterned paper in common between my two pockets. I'm going to create this little flip. So my photo is actually outside of the pocket, and that's because I wanted to add some journaling. These photos were maps of the area where our hotel was, and this part of the story is just kind of impressions of that part of town that we stayed in. And we were actually in New Jersey and not New York because it was cheaper. So I want to make sure I have plenty of room for journaling. And the way I like to do that, not only does this add interactive elements, but it gives me lots of space under the photo to put journaling instead of trying to squeeze it in right next to the photo. So the best way I like to do these flips is with washi tape. And because washi tape is notorious for being not sticky enough to hold things down, I will add extra glue here. So I add glue to the washi, tape it down on the front. I did leave a bit of border when I printed my photos. I printed them with borders. I trimmed off most of the borders except for the top one on this photo, specifically because I knew I wanted to create a flap with it. If your tape is wonky and uneven, I just clip it and tear it on the sides, and that evens up my tape, and I wipe off any excess glue. That glue will take quite a while to dry on the plastic, so go ahead and set that aside. Now I'm creating the journaling block for inside. Again, I just go back to my scraps and I'm going to create my journal block lines aren't wide enough to go across the whole block. So I'm going to split the difference and create a gutter in the middle and create 2 columns of space for my journaling. And that's how I handle that. So that will get glued inside. I add liquid glue to this one because I'm going to put it on that 5x7 layer, slide it in, and that liquid glue will allow me to wiggle that block around so that it's even and also so that it is hiding underneath that photo. Another fun thing about these particular 5x7 pockets is that it has a middle strip that you can add, titles to, but I use that. They fit perfectly with the branding strips that you cut off of your pattern paper. So that went into there. I am using leftover embellishments. Like I said, I'm trying to use up as many scraps as possible, and this was a cut apart frame, so I'm adding that on there. These aren't highly embellished. I just add a few bits and pieces, little washi tape here. I've got a punch that I'm going to use to add a little handle to that front photo so that people get the clue to flip it open and read inside. And, I did not used to like doing these interactive elements, especially having my photos on the outside of page protectors. It kind of makes me cringe thinking about, these are going to get ruined. However, everything is digital. And if something does get messed up, I could print another one. Or that could just become part of the history of the album. And in this case, I have 2 photos of they're both map photos. One just has more of the satellite detail and the other one's just more of a graphical map. So this particular photo isn't super important. So it's not bothering me that it is on the outside of the page protector. And honestly, the way I got used to that was to just do it. If that kind of thing bugs you, just do it and remind yourself, if it gets messed up, I can reprint another one. Because we have those digital photos, be sure to back up your photos. I have lost digital photos in the past and it's heartbreaking. So back up your digital photos and then you'll always have copies again. All right, on the back side of this, I am going to create another page. I do check out what the layout looks like from the back side of those papers I used, and in this case it was fine. I added another border strip to that skinny section, and then just created my layout with the papers as is. And here is what it looks like in the end. Notice I did print out titles for these ones, because that's going to be less time consuming than using alphabet stickers. So that wraps up my use of scraps for this month's Counterfeit Kit Challenge. And if you want to come join us, totally free, friendly group on Facebook and on the blog, I will leave you all the links below if you want to check us out. And until I'm back with you next time, I hope you have an artful day.